Welcome to the Finding Purpose LiveCast, where we feature authors, leaders, and speakers of purpose on a live platform to have truly authentic conversations. And now your host, Davin Salvagno.
Hey, Zach, how are you?
I'm good, Davin. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I am so excited to be on this call today with you, just to see your face again and to share some friendly dialogue back and forth. I know it's times right now that have been challenging for a lot of people, and you're a kindred spirit of purpose that I know that you're going to share some wisdom and insight that are going to help a lot of people today.
Yeah, thanks. I hope so. Yeah, it's the time for this conversation.
It is indeed. It is. So today we have Zach Mercurio on the Finding Purpose LiveCast, and Zach is a speaker. He is a strategist. He is the author of The Invisible Leader, which is a phenomenal book. And there's so many people that talk about purpose, but I will tell you, Zach is someone who talks about purpose from a place of authenticity, of rawness, and of intellect. And I am just extremely excited for him to share his journey and to walk through that today. So as we jump in here, Zach, tell us a little bit about who you are, your purpose, your journey, and how you got to what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I'll take you back. I am the youngest of three brothers. And so grew up in Rhode Island in an Italian family, most of whom have not left Rhode Island except for me. And when you're the youngest, you get good at a couple of things. You get really good at entertaining yourself, which I think leads into just my inherent curiosity about everything. You know, when I was in college, I was interested in everything, which I'll get to later is not a very good trait when you're trying to do things like pick a career or find a job when everybody around you seems like they know what they want to do. And the second thing you get very good at is comparing yourself to other people. You know, am I measuring up to my older brothers? And, you know, C.S. Lewis says comparison is the thief of joy. And there were many times and moments that I felt that joy being taken away because I was constantly searching for significance, which leads me really into like the work I do today. What I'm telling you right now is actually a revelation in the past 3 months because I had a coach that asked me, think about why you do what you even care about purpose. It was like a meta purpose discussion. And I said, well, I don't really have a traumatic story. You know, I don't have any traumatic story. And he said to me, that's your traumatic story. That you feel the need to qualify, that you need some traumatic story, that you need some significance to be worthy, right? So now go back to where we're at. And that little 5-year-old, right, of clawing for significance, I was a very happy kid, curious kid, but in my life, I would constantly try to do things to measure up to others. So as I reflect, like I would play a sport, not because I wanted to play a sport, but because it would make me look better. Or make me fit into a particular group, right? And there were things inherently that I loved as a kid that have come out now. My love of learning, my curiosity. I do love sports, just not all the sports. And I realized that I was trying to do things and get things to give myself worth. So take that and then put me into college. So I left Rhode Island and I went to college at James Madison University in Virginia. And it was amazing because all of a sudden, right, like I didn't have that comparison, that benchmark. And so I had this freedom to explore who I was. But the problem was that I was still thinking that I could get significance based on what I did and what I got, what I acquired and what I achieved. And I never really figured out who I was or ask that question of why I was. And I kept making decisions, even though there was something burning inside me that I could feel, I could name the things that I love to do. And I started picking majors, right? Like I had 3 different majors in the first 3 years of college. And really, it was honestly because I was thinking, oh yeah, I'll be an advertising major because it will look really cool when I graduate and I'm at a happy hour and I meet my future life partner and they say, what do you do? And I can say, oh, I'm in advertising. Like, how cool would that look? Like, I did these things for the idea of what they would look like. And I think that's also a product of how we educate people. We tend to educate people for success. We educate people like to acquire and achieve something. And I quickly learned that the problem with being compelled and motivated by acquiring and achieving things is the fact that you can either achieve them or you don't. And then what? So here's what happened. I got an advertising job out of college, and on the outside, everything was good. Like, I was making good money. I was in DC. I was successful, but I was miserable and I felt completely empty. And it wasn't because of the job. It was because I didn't know 2 things. I didn't know why I was and who I was, and I didn't know how to discern purpose in my job. I didn't know how to discern meaning in the everyday. And that left me depleted. I was around people that all they would talk about was targets, quotas, sales goals. Meanwhile, I was out there meeting human beings that actually needed the work that we did, but we didn't talk about them. Everybody around me was saying, when we got in on Monday morning, they would say, oh man, is it the weekend yet? I mean, it's ridiculous how many people live for 2/7 of their lives the weekend. Right. I mean, 27% of our waking life, most people live for. Obviously, those times of rest, renewal are important, but the work is in the everyday. And the moment that led me to where I'm at today is I write about this in the book, and it's the only cool story I really have, so I tell it every time I'm around anybody, is I went on a lunch break in the middle of 2 sales calls, and I met a cab driver. And it was like a Tuesday at the time, and it was in Washington, D.C. And one of the things you don't do on a weekday in D.C. is make small talk. And I was at this park outside of Reagan National Airport called Gravelly Point State Park. And I parked my car. I was watching the planes come and go, thinking about, is this it? Am I just going to trudge through life? And this cab driver pulls up to me. He gets out of his cab and he's smoking a cigarette and he just starts making small talk. He says, how are you doing? And I grumbled the same thing that I heard all of these people grumble. Is it the weekend yet?
Oh.
And it was like a Tuesday. And then I asked him, I said, how are you doing? And these people you meet that they just exude joy. Like they just exude the spirit in whatever occupation they're in. Well, that smile, he had this big smile on his face. And I said, well, how are you doing? I expected this cab driver to hate his job. And he said, I'm doing great. He goes, and he started telling me by name the people he just talked to on his last ride. And he said, I'm people's friends they don't have. I'm their parents they don't talk to. He goes, when people fly into DC, I'm the first person they get to see in the United States. He goes, I love it. He goes, you can't beat it. And I remember he was smoking a cigarette and he put it out and he said, have a great day. And he got in his cab and he drove away. And I was like, I need to find out how to live like that. He didn't talk about what he did. He didn't talk about how he did it. He talked about his contribution. And I've spent the last 8 years since trying to figure out how to learn that perspective, learn that mindset, what I call a purposeful mindset of being contribution centered in your thinking, your being, and doing with whatever it is that you're doing. And since then, I've studied janitors, mechanics, bus drivers, people who do the everyday work that makes society possible, that all of a sudden in the last 3 months we've said are essential, but we're always essential. Helping to uncover what the mindset is, the disposition, and what's happening around them when they experience their everyday work as purposeful. And so I'm doing that. I work in the Center for Meaning and Purpose at Colorado State University, studying meaningful work and purpose in work and developing a purposeful mindset. I do consulting with organizations, helping leaders create the conditions to enable purpose and meaningfulness. And then my biggest project is myself, of learning the habits of being purposeful. And it goes down to little things like getting up in the morning, checking my phone and not saying, what do I have to do? But saying, how is what I'm going to do going to affect others?
Yes.
What's my effect? David Brooks calls this eulogy virtues instead of resume virtues. Most of us pursue resume virtues, what we acquire and achieve for our status. Eulogy virtues are what people are going to say about you when you're gone. And that's been my path. And it's been rewarding, but I'll go full circle now. And people on your purpose journey, ask yourself this question: who is your 5-year-old self? Because my purpose is to help people realize their own significance.
So good.
And it goes back to the 5-year-old self needing someone to have that purpose around them.
So good. You remind me of, there's a great book called Halftime by Bob Buford. And he talks about how most people spend their life trying to achieve success, which is what you kind of outlined earlier. I'm going to do this, or I'm going to go into this because I see the success and I want people to think about me a certain way, or I want to have these things, right? Those resume attributes that he talked about. And he says that no matter what you accomplish in your life, no matter how successful you become, there's always going to be this emptiness within inside you because you're after the wrong thing.
Yes.
He said what we are created for is significance in each other's lives. And he says this quote, he says, it is possible to become successful and not be significant, but it's impossible to live a life of significance and not be successful. And he says that usually you don't realize that until you're between the ages of 35 and 55. And many people misjudge that as a midlife crisis because they're trying to find their 5-year-old self. And so I love that you figured that out ahead of time. And that you
really. It took me 9 years of doing this work, which I think is an important point.
That is an important point. It's
like the purposeful and meaningful work consultant. It takes 9 years of doing purpose work to figure it out.
It's the longest halftime ever, right? It's a 9-year halftime, not a 15-minute halftime. Right. But you nailed that on the head. And that journey is not an easy one. That journey, you mentioned that the biggest project that you're working on is yourself. And that often requires us to overcome a level of adversity, of crawling and scratching towards this thing that we now know that we want to accomplish, particularly not for ourselves, but for others. And so talk to us about some adversity that you've come across in this last 9 years, maybe even before that, maybe even right now. How on this journey of purpose are you dealing with the adversity that gets in the way of accomplishing the significance that you now know you're created for?
So let's back up, because I do have to get a little bit scientific, because that's how my brain works. And the reason why we cannot forget the reason why purpose works. The reason why, in all of the studies and blog posts and infographics on the statistics of purpose engaging people, of making people better, of companies better, is not because it makes us feel better. It's because it makes us forget about ourselves to remember ourselves. So self-transcendence is the crux of purpose. This is very hard for people to understand.
Yes.
Business leaders, people that I work with, people want to see purpose as something that makes you feel good and you find your gifts and you live this like joyous life. Joy, which is happiness that's been liberated from circumstances, is a result of transcending yourself. It's the crux of purpose. So anytime we experience adversity and we can't rebound from it, it's usually because our identity is misplaced. And that's what I've found. So the adversity for me, I would say every day is adversity. And why I say that is my family has a genetic predisposition to anxiety and depression.
Mm.
And about 3 months after I got married in 2010, I couldn't even wake up for some reason. I mean, I couldn't even get out of bed and just keep going. I felt sick. I was having panic attacks. I thought I was dying. I went to 3 different doctors. And I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know what was wrong with me, right? Like, what was wrong with me? What can I do to get through this? And I started looking inward. Like, I started doing the wrong thing. I started clawing at myself to figure out, what can I do? What can I do? Let me pull myself up. You should be able to pull yourselves up by your bootstraps and keep going, all of that. Right. But, what I realized is, I remember I was just like, it was one of those mornings that was just awful. We're reacting and not responding. Our bodies narrow our attention on just our survival. So when we narrow on just our survival, on ourselves, we become worse. And that's when I was going to a church in Loveland, Colorado, and I was living in Longmont at the time, where I got a text from a pastor that I really didn't connect with. And he just asked, how are you doing? And I was like, I was not even in a place to even pretend how I was doing. And I remember we met for coffee, and then the self-centeredness, the narrowed attention started opening up, and I started asking for help. And I started expanding my attention. And this is what purpose does. It expands our attention outward. When we stop the navel gazing, when we look outward, we connect better. We make better relationships. We collaborate better. And that's why purpose works, is because it lifts our eyes up and out. And I remember we started talking, and that really helped me. And then I went to a doctor and asked for help, and realized that the doctor had a reason, had a purpose. And his purpose was me in that moment. And I started seeing the world in this way, and my anxiety didn't go away. But what has happened is I've become deeply, deeply friends with my anxiety, because my anxiety reminds me that my brain is focusing on the wrong thing.
Ooh, that's good.
It reminds me that I'm focusing on the wrong thing, and I need to focus outward and expand my attention. And so that's been something that's been really helpful for me, and why my work, like, it's almost like I was meant to have anxiety so I could be able to do this work to help my anxiety, so I could understand the work to help others.
So good.
And then the second area I would say is, like, let's just go with this pandemic. Like, you and I, we do live events with a lot of people, not a very pandemic resistant occupation.
Nope.
And I'll tell you another example. I was in the parking lot of my kid's daycare, and I wrote about this in a piece that I think you read. And I was panicking because I had gotten like 6 emails canceling events. So like 40% of my revenue business for the remainder of the year gone, 3 hours on a Friday afternoon. And I'm sitting in my kid's daycare, and I'm panicking again. I go into panic attack mode. And again, when we react on instinct, we narrow our attention, and we just lose track of time because we're so self-absorbed. 30 minutes goes by. I was scratching and clawing. What am I going to do? How do I get business? Texting my wife, panicking. Meanwhile, my kids are waiting for me to pick them up from daycare. I'd forgot about them. I go into daycare. My little 2-year-old comes running up to me, gives me an extra long hug, I think that day. And he's just like, "Daddy, look at this finger painting I made of a frog." And I realized he does not care about my revenue, my keynotes, all of those things, right? My resume virtues. He needed me to be there. I had hinged my identity on my doingness, my ways of doing, and not my ways of being, not who I was.
So good.
And this crisis revealed that. And right now, I just ask, as I'm about to react, I just say, who am I being right now? If my purpose is to help people realize my own significance, and my kid barges in the door right now, how am I going to respond to him? How would my purpose respond to him? And being on purpose and asking, not how am I going to get through this? How am I going to get my business back? But who needs me right now has actually helped my business as a result. the transcendence, right? And that's why having kids for me, I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, has been the most amazing thing in my life. Not because I think everybody should have kids. That's the only way to experience purpose. But why does having kids, why do most parents talk about having kids as transformational? Why? It's self-transcendence. So I just tell people, go find something that you can self-transcend to, if it's not kids, because that's ultimately what's going to help you leave a legacy.
That's so good. That transcendence of ourselves. There's another book, and probably the most impactful book that I've read outside of the Bible that's impacted my life is this really small book by Tim Keller called The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness. It's 40 pages. It's this big. And he talks in there about, our identity is not in our accomplishments or our failures. It's not in what we're achieving for ourselves and how we're measuring up, right? Our identity is finite. And for me as a Christian, my identity being in Christ, that doesn't change based off of whether or not I succeed or fail. And it does a great job of that. But more than that, what the book does is it helps us to take our eyes off of ourselves and say, when you forget about yourself, when you transcend yourself and you take your eyes off of yourself and you place them on others, then and only then can you be fully used for the purpose that you were created for. And so the most purposeful thing that we could do is take our eyes off of ourselves in every circumstance, particularly adversity, and place them on others. I love that story, that daycare story that you shared. And that's why I included it in the book, Finding Purpose, because it's such a great example. We all think that purpose sometimes is, how do I get paid to do what I love to do? But then again, that's focusing on ourselves. When really what purpose is, what is it that I'm good at? What are my giftings, talents, abilities, experiences? And then where is the need? Where can I take my eyes off of myself and on others? And how can I help? And if I can do those things, then ask yourself, if I did that, is that something that I would enjoy doing, that I would fall in love with? And that's the other element. And if you can get paid to do it, great. But there's a lot of parents out there who they're good at being parents. Some of them might not think that they are, and they are. And their parents need them to be parents. That's who they need to be. You said we get caught up in doing. We need to get caught up in being. And I have never met a parent who doesn't fall in love eventually with being a parent. That's why they talk about it. And guess what? They don't get paid to do it. So that's the last piece, is the payment piece, right? It's what am I good at? Where is the need? And falling in love with that. And that's why I think parents a lot resonate with that, which is why that story of you and your
even leaders right now, like that I've been coaching through this, like they're asking the wrong questions. How are we going to get through this? What are we going to do? Like people try to get the pain to go away. Yeah. It's not going to go away. It's always going to be here, right? And Viktor Frankl said that what despair is suffering minus meaning.
Yes.
Like, so when we just suffer through something to get a better quarterly earnings report next quarter, it's despair inducing. But when we can say, hey, instead of how am I going to get through this, who needs me to get through this?
Yes.
Who do I need to be right now? It's incredibly powerful. And what's fascinating about this work is that the only reason why I was able to coach my clients that way is because I needed to teach myself that in that parking lot.
Yeah.
This is why, like, this whole notion of you have to be perfectly ready to do work is misguided. I mean, my messiness enables me to do the messy work.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll say something else about what you said. And look, I think self-awareness work, personal development work is all incredibly important. If you don't know your gifts, you don't know what you have, the energy, the resources you have to contribute to others. That intersection, I think you and I both agree, is where purpose arises. But self-awareness without purpose is self-indulgence.
Yes. Ooh, say it again. Say it again.
Self-awareness without purpose is self-indulgence.
So good.
So you can do all of the things. You can start like meditating. You can start learning your strengths. You can start learning your passions, all of that stuff. And that's great. but it's all cut off. You've contained it for yourself. It's just going to sit and fester with you and leave the earth with you.
Yes.
Unless you open it up, right?
That's
to
right.
other people.
That's right.
So
One of
that's been one of my big insights is over the past few years of working with a lot of different coaches who do focus on personal development, which I think is important, and honoring the self. But I think Eleanor Roosevelt says you cannot leave a legacy without contributing.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I know you work in the Center for Purpose and Meaning, and we had the Purpose Summit last year, and Dennis Mosley Williams, who's a good friend and was one of the speakers at that event, he shared a quote that's been attributed to Shakespeare, Picasso, Viscott, and go on. And it says, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose is to give it away.
Right.
And so many times, like you just said, we become self-indulged and we don't find the opportunities to share that. And the other thing that you said, which was really powerful for businesses, for organizations, for leaders right now, at some point, they all started with a purpose. They all started with some problem, some service, something they created that people needed. And they're just trying to figure out, well, how do we get through this? How do we get through this? When the question they need to be asking is, who do we need to be here for? Why did we start this what was the problem that we solved in the beginning? And when this is all over, who do we need to be here for? And what do we need to do now? What's important now so that we can be here to continue to fulfill that purpose, right? That's why we see companies making ventilators where they used to make cars. We see vodka distilleries making sanitizer. We see clothing companies making masks, all of those things, because what are they good at? Making stuff. But what is the need right now? The need is not cars, vodka, and well, maybe, but cars, vodka, and clothes. Then the need is ventilators, sanitizer, and masks. And so it's transitioning your gifts to meet the need so that you can continue to be who you are individually and organizationally at the end of what adversity is that you're going through. That was so well
that is
said.
why individual purpose and organizational purpose are very similar, actually, because organizations are individuals who organize.
That's right.
So like where your strengths meet a human need is your purpose. As an organization, you have strengths. You have things that you have that energize you in this entity. And who needs those things? And that's exactly right. That's where purpose is. It is disturbing, actually, how many people think they can get a result by pursuing a result. There's a great quote from a economist, and I can't remember his name, but it says, measures are important, but when the measure becomes the target, it's a bad measure.
Yes.
And so, because like you can't have an effect without a cause. It's just basic. My 5-year-old knows that. So if you want an effect, what would you do? Pursue the cause. As a business, if you wanted a result, what would you do? Oh no, let's pursue the result. It doesn't make any sense.
None.
You
That's
pursue
right.
the contribution, right? Purposeful people
right.
in businesses relentlessly pursue their contribution, and they trust that the effect will follow.
That's right.
But it's so counterintuitive for our brains because what we want is instant gratification.
Yes.
So we want to do something that feels good. Oh, you know what? I'll adjust some sales goals, or I'll adjust some goals in my life, and boom, I'll feel better for a quarter. Or I was just working with a client that says, well, we pay people well, so they should be happy, right? And I was like, yeah, if you want to motivate people for a quarter, motivate them by fear of losing their money. If you want to motivate them for ever, give them purpose, right?
Yes.
And that's, I could go on and on.
I know. And you know what?
It doesn't make sense to me.
At all.
It doesn't make sense to pursue a result and try to get a result by pursuing it without the goal.
The result is supposed to measure the purpose, right? I mean, realistically, Patrick Lencioni says every organization must face the fact that they exist to improve the quality of human life in some way. Profitability is just a measurement of how well we do that. But so often we get caught up in the profitability. Every company starts with a purpose. They invite people to come alongside that. They put processes in place. They pursue profit. And then they shift the focus from the purpose and the people to the processes and the profit. They pursue a number for the number and they lose it. And I know you and I can go all day long and talk about this. And I know this is only supposed to be 30 minutes, so we're going to go a little bit longer here. But I do want people to, I want to pull back a little bit as we wrap up in these last few minutes, because I know you do a lot of these interviews and you ask a lot of questions to other people. And there's one question specifically that I want to ask you. And that's, when was the first time that you recognized that your work specifically had purpose and meaning? Share what that moment was. And then maybe as we wrap up, just a few final words for those who are still trying to find that moment for themselves.
Okay. So find that moment for yourself. The moments are already out there for you. Just there, you'll not know them, right? A river source knows nothing of where it goes, but it goes somewhere. So you have to trust that. And that's been my experience, right? I'll get emails from people after a session that I did that I thought was terrible, that tell me that for the first time they realized that they mattered. Just recently, I'll give you an example because I can't think of the first time, but I'll give you the most recent time. I was doing a session for food service workers at a local school district on a Friday afternoon. They had been really busy. These are cafeteria workers. Most of them are hourly, sort of tenuous lives outside of work, a lot of lower socioeconomic status. And a woman emailed me, and it was like 3 weeks after. And I was like, the session went horrible. I didn't think people were engaged. And she said, Zach, she wrote in this email, the last thing I wanted to do on a Friday afternoon was listen to some guy talk. And she wrote, she said, for the first time in my life, I realized that I did matter. I do matter right now. And my job matters. It may not make the most money. It may not be looked highly upon by a lot of other people, but it matters. And she went on to tell me a story of all these kids that she works with. Like, she was thinking about her purpose, like the kids finally that she serves in the cafeteria. And those are the moments that I realized that this work matters. Like, you and I were talking and you're like, I don't know how many people were going to be on this call. And I'm like, I don't care. It's just me and you, right? Because we can't not matter. Right. We inputs into the system all the time. But I will go back to the time where I was like, wow, this is important. It was about 7 years ago. And I was trying to get started doing speaking and training work and getting this purpose work out into the world, which 7 years ago, it was not really a big thing, as you probably know. And I was doing a lot of unpaid things, and it was an afternoon, and it was at 2:00 in the afternoon, and someone invited me in to come and do a guest lecture for a class of sophomore students. 2:00 in the afternoon, they had to be there. Was some intro course they were taking. And I go in, they were all really tired. And I just asked them one question. How have you changed the world today? And nobody could answer the question. But then we had an amazing discussion about how inevitably, even if you smiled at someone, you dramatically altered their brain composition forever, right? All of the science behind it. And it was really cool because we're talking about mattering, which I think mattering is the prerequisite for purpose work. You have to believe that you matter. So afterward, I get done, I shut my computer off, and the students are kind of just mulling out. I got a few claps, you know what I mean? And this kid comes up to me, had to be about 17 or 18, freshman. And he said, 3 months ago, I wanted to commit suicide. And I've been thinking about it daily because all my friends think they have everything figured out. It looks like everybody knows what they want to do with their life. Like, I've never felt worth anything. And he said, I realized that when you asked that question, how have you changed the world today? He said, I realized that I matter. I just want to thank you for that. And that was an unpaid speaking engagement, 2:00, hot lecture room, Thursday afternoon. I didn't want to be there, really. Initially, I was like, oh gosh, here we go. But that's it. So my advice is that you matter right now.
That's so good.
I would be so remiss not to comment on this moment. What's going on in this country right now?
Yeah.
Mattering is a human right. It's a human right to matter.
Yeah.
We all matter,
Yeah.
right? We all matter. Some of us are in systems that tell us we don't matter, but we have to take captive the fact that in the next conversation you have, you can use your strengths to improve that person's life. That's it. It's just taking the moment to moment captive. Purpose happens in moments, not in events.
Yes.
So that would be my advice, is to take the next moment captive and ask yourself, instead of what do I have to do next? What do I have to do after this call I'm listening to? Ask, what is my effect going to be on another person after this call? How am I going to use my strengths to impact this other person?
So good.
In the next moment.
In the next moment. Get caught up in the being, in the moment. Sendelaney had a thing once, it's on my wall over here. It says, be here now. Be here now. We can get so caught up on the fact that, oh, this was only supposed to go until 11:30 or 9:30 your time, and it's 11:37 and I got another meeting, and I don't know. Be here now. Hold the moment captive, and then think about, what is the impact that I can have on others that I'm in conversation with or around in the moment, because everyone matters. Everyone has a purpose, as you just said. And you started this call, as we wrap up, with comparison is the thief of joy. And it is. And we live in such a comparative society. It's easy for us to look at social media and compare ourselves when we don't know the stories of others. We need to take our eyes off of ourselves, hold every moment captive, and focus on our contribution in the moment now. So good. Zach, I could spend all day talking. We're going to have to do this again. We're going to have an episode 2.
We really need to do this again.
Really do. So,
and invite more people onto the call, because I would love to dig into this stuff, because I'm really, as you can tell, I mean, it's just as why I feel like I was made. I mean, you just feel it. I mean, I'm in it. So awesome. I love it. I love the work that you're doing, and thanks for everybody for joining.
I'm glad that you were here today, and we will do this again. There will be a sequel featuring Zack Mercurio. And so today we were here at Zack Mercurio. He, again, speaker, strategist, author of The Invisible Leader, and one of the most purposeful and purpose-filled people that I know. You can follow him at ZachMercurio.com. You can see him on LinkedIn. You can see him on Facebook. And Zach, just once again, thank you again for your time today. Thank you for your contribution in this moment and in the moments that will follow. You are making a tremendous difference in a world that needs it very much right now.